welcome to come and join us over here if you do want to. Right, and welcome JP and to Kurt. So JP, shall I hand over to you and the rest of the team, or Karen, to do the introductions? And
thank you, Madam Chair. I think you've covered off the introduction. So I suppose just for context, I've just got a slide here. One of the things we thought was really important is there has been some changes to the legislation, and we're in a position now where we need to update some of our policies because the timing is getting very near the end. What's really important for us, and we just wanted to try and put it together on a slide, is we're starting to talk about community safety phase 2. So we've had over the last year a strong focus on the CBD. But what we're starting to say now is actually we're starting to think more widely about how we improve safety and reduce harm across our community. So we're intending on bringing back a more detailed presentation to you about some of our phase 2 interventions that we'd like to put in place. But critical to that is our bylaws and our statutory policies as well, because all of them have often a very important function in reducing harm and improving community safety. So they are a critical tool. So what we've just got on the slide, so while we're here today to talk about district licensing, what we will do at the end of this session is just talk to you about where we go next with the local alcohol policy. And that's a really important tool for us just to put in place some rules to help reduce that impact of alcohol and alcohol-related harm. So we'll touch on that through the presentation. But you also know that we're out for consultation at the moment around dog control and dog control bylaw. And obviously some recent incidents have really highlighted some concerns in the community about the harm created by animals and animal control policy and framework. So again, that's a critical policy for us. And equally, again, thinking about harm in the community, we've got another workshop tomorrow on type 4 gambling. So there's a series of policies, and bylaws that are coming together, and we'd like to make sure we're showing to you the lens we're putting that through against your priorities about ensuring that we have a successful, revitalised and hopefully a very attractive inner city to live, work and invest, but equally looking at how we're improving safety and reducing harm across our community. So all the policies you'll see over the next sort of few months, and I think you'll feel like you're on a bit of a conveyor belt of looking at submissions and reviews of different policies. It's all got that lens being applied to it. So I just thought that was a bit of a critical introduction for us before we hand across to Karen Hunt. Sorry,
JP, just thank you for setting that scene. I was a bit remiss. I probably should have opened the meeting formally with a karakia, so maybe if we could do that after you've set the scene before we get into the formal part of the meeting, if that's all right, everyone. So if I just take the karakia now, so kia ora tātou, tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho, kia taua ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, omi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnā koe. Thank you, JP. Sorry.
So sorry, just picking up, and so really we've got Karen Hunt here, who is our Commissioner and Chair of our District Licensing Committee and has been for some time. So Karen's got probably some key questions for you as we start thinking about refreshing and improving our policy. It's for her, it's a chance probably to reflect on 5 years worth of being the chair. And we're also lucky enough to have Anna Morrison here in the room too, to hear your discussions as she takes over as chair going forward. So really, Karen's going to guide us through this presentation with some support from Kurt. And I think there's plenty of opportunities across the presentation to ask questions. Before we highlight the time frame that we're expecting to try and bring to you an updated policy for your consideration and for public consultation.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. Lovely to see some familiar faces and to meet some new members of council. I just thought I'd give a brief introduction about myself. I was a councillor here from 2007 to 2019, RMA Commissioner for 10 years with chair endorsement. I chaired the RMA Policy Committee here, various portfolio leads, including the LAP, and I was chair of the Rotorua District Licensing Committee while on council, so it's over 10 years in fact, JP, so that's all right, the last 5 as commissioner. And since 2017, at the beginning, I co-chaired and now chair the District Licensing Advisory Group, which reports to Ministry of Justice and to Te Whatu Ora. So that's a national body of licensing members. So today, I'd just like to go over what we will cover today. So essentially bits about the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. What exactly is a DLC? What are our roles and responsibilities? When we have hearings, and what happens a bit there. Alcohol in our communities and the Act, and that's really the focus for the councillors here today, is the effect that has, the alcohol-related harm, and the things we can do. The recent changes, there have been some significant changes in the last 12 months to the Act, and also local alcohol policies, and I'll talk about the landmark Supreme Court decision in Auckland and any other considerations. So please, after each slide, we'll have some questions. If you have questions, just let us know. So I think that's now hand over to Kurt.
All right, kia ora everybody, and thank you for taking the time to hear from us today. So just off the back of what Karen was just talking about, I'd just like to lay a little bit of foundation here and not assume that everybody knows about what we're talking about here today. I guess starting with before we even get into the DLC or District Licensing Committee themselves, it is always good to have a look at the underlying or empowering legislation. So in this case, it's the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act 2012. The Act effectively deals with the safe and responsible sale and supply and consumption of alcohol, and importantly, the minimisation of harm caused by excessive or inappropriate use. So it's not about just stopping everyday social drinking, it is very much around the inappropriate and excessive use and any harm that can come from that. So that is what is often referred to as the object of the Act. The Act replaced the previous Sale and Supply of Liquor Act in 1989 and is subject to recent legislative amendments, which we'll speak about a bit later on in the presentation. Essentially, when this Act came about, the 2012 Act, it aimed to improve New Zealand's drinking culture and reduce alcohol-related harm, and it required licences or certificates to sell or supply alcohol under the Act. The Act also, back then, aimed to enhance community involvement in licensing decisions. That's quite a salient point, and the second to last bullet point there, definitely there is recognition that the Act from 2012 did not succeed in the community participation that it set out to achieve. So importantly, councils are legislatively required under the Act to have a district licensing committee and for council to administer its functions. So I guess my role here today, just to be clear, is not as the manager of regulatory, so it's as the secretary of the district licensing committee, which is largely about process, ensuring good process, that what is coming before the DLC and coming out of the DLC is of the right standard, meets all of the legal requirements, answering questions around process for our public as well, and basically an interface to and from our district licensing committee, which we'll explain a little more about that independence shortly. Are there any questions from that first slide? Okay. So getting into the DLC itself, so a District Licensing Committee, or DLC for short, it is a committee of council with distinct powers under the Act, and the DLC is actually entirely funded by alcohol licence applications. The committee has the prime responsibility of considering and deciding on every single alcohol licence or manager's certificate, so that's for duty managers across the entire district. Most of the applications are considered and approved what we call just on the papers. However, any that are not necessarily straightforward will proceed to a DLC hearing for the DLC committee to consider and decide on. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, over the last year in terms of on licences, so your restaurants, etc., there's 163 of those currently within our district. Off licences, 57. Club licences, 44. So we're talking 264 licensed premises currently across our district. On top of that, the committee also considers special licences, which are generally just for events that don't fall inside any of those categories. And last year, the DLC decided on 81 of those. So there's a fair bit goes on in the alcohol licensing space. So getting back to the committee, a DLC is a committee of council under section 200 subsection 1 of the Act, and it may include councillors. However, it is entirely independent, inquisitorial and impartial body and operates differently from all other council committees. So DLCs do have the powers and procedures similar to those of a court of law or a judge, and are obliged to objectively make findings of facts and draw conclusions from them. This means, for example, that a DLC can issue summonses requiring people to appear, and the same for witnesses, or require the production of documents that licensees must provide to the DLC. Oops. So DLCs are not required to publicise or run their meetings in the same way as other council committees, and they also do have very wide powers of Commission of Inquiry under the Commission of Inquiries Act. Each DLC is made up of a chairperson and 2 members who have terms of office of up to 5 years, and council is the party that's responsible under the Act for ensuring and assisting with the selection and recruitment of the DLC members. So the chair can either be an elected member of council or, in Karen's case, a commissioner appointed by the chief executive. Members are either community members or elected members of the territorial authority who have experience relevant to alcohol licensing matters. If a chair, I've covered that, Commissioner Hunt. DLCs are independent from council and cannot be subject to influence from the council or any other third party. So that's actually inherent in the Act. While a council can, if it wishes, be represented and participate in a DLC hearing, a council cannot override a decision of a DLC. A decision of a DLC can be appealed to the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority, so commonly referred to as ALA, so they're situated in Wellington, by any party that was party to that decision. Decisions of ALA can also be appealed to the High Court and then to the Court of Appeal and all the way up to the Supreme Court. Importantly for us, councils are responsible for resourcing and supporting DLCs so that they can fulfil their obligations under the Act effectively. Most of this happens via the role of the DLC Secretary and our Compliance Administration team. So just for clarity as well, you're probably all familiar that we do have licensing inspectors here at Council. The inspectors are council staff, however, they're quite unique in that under the Act and when conducting the role of inspector, they are entirely independent from council, so they must form their own view. Council is also obligated under the Act to provide an independent environment for them. The inspectors, alongside the police and medical officer of health, are referred to as the reporting agencies. So all 3 are regularly sent alcohol licence applications to review and consider whether or not they have any matters in opposition. If they do, that licence then proceeds to a hearing. Inspectors consider the following types of licences or certificates, so you'll see those on the screen there, and I did refer to them earlier on. The inspector does have a slightly different role in that they are the only one out of the reporting agencies that have to provide a summary report, so they're effectively the last cab off the rank, and that report also flows through to our District Licensing Committee. Under the Act, Council is also required to have a Chief Licensing Inspector. So just pausing briefly there, does anybody have any questions so far in terms of these slides? Excellent. So the Chief Licensing Inspector is slightly different to the other inspectors in that they are actually focused on ensuring consistency with the Act, mentoring and quality control of our inspectorate. Thank you, Karen.
Back on again. Okay, so as Curtis said, the DLCs are the decision-making body of council, and essentially, if the not council, so we're the decision-making body. If the police and medical officer of health or the inspector do not oppose under the Section 105 criteria, and there are no public objections, then the application may be granted with conditions on the papers. And essentially that's the role of the chair, so they do that on their own without the rest of the committee members. If there are any objections or opposition, again under the same Section 105 criteria, then we must hold a hearing. So it's mandated that we must actually have a hearing to decide on whether to grant or refuse the application. And of course that gives anyone the opportunity to put their case forward if they're the applicant, or put their opposition forward if they are either one of the agencies or a member of the public. Now, trade competitors cannot object to a fellow business down the road simply because they don't like them or they're taking their customers. DLCs can decline a renewal at any time, and we can issue a renewal with new conditions attached. Also, generally that would be done within a hearing in order to hear both sides of the party. Now, what I would like to ask you at this point, does anyone here know of anyone who's participated in a hearing at a DLC level? Obviously, Conan, you're slightly, I won't count your hand necessarily. And if so, if any of the other councillors are familiar with anyone that's appeared, what was their experience like? No, and I think that really covers off the fact that most people have no idea that we even have a district licensing committee or what we actually do. Now, on one level you could say that's a really good thing because the community goes about its business without knowing, and we just deal with stuff as it turns up when there is a significant problem. But it actually comes to the heart of what we're here today to speak about, which is the local alcohol policy, which is our community's voice and say on how they would like alcohol to be managed in our community, and the rules and regulations you can put in the policy that actually make the job of the DLC much easier. So that is really the cornerstone. So the other thing I'll say, just over the past probably slightly more than 5 years, we've closed 5 premises. We have declined to renew their licences. All of them, I think, have appealed to ALA, the body above us, and ALA has upheld all of the DLC's decisions in that capacity. So we haven't had any of those decisions to decline or refuse to renew, change, reverted. Okay. Any questions there? Okay. So alcohol harm in our community. Now, recently, there was the first national study in more than a decade, and in fact, Jamie Morton in the Herald on the 20th of August wrote about it and said that it's teased out the impact that alcohol has on a wide range of health conditions and diseases. So if you're interested, just do a Herald search on that one. They showed that annually there's over 900 deaths, and that, well, you can read the stats, 29,000 hospitalisations in 2018 alone, and nearly 130,000 ACC claims. It's a 9.1 billion cost to us, the ratepayers. And that's a really sobering fact, pardon the pun. It's a really important number to remember, and that we spend about $4 billion annually on alcohol. So alcohol attributes to deaths, they're twice as high for Māori. And that's really significant in our community, because you, have the ability to make some changes that hopefully might make a difference there. 75% of alcohol is sold from off-licence premises, and as Kurt said, we've got 57 of them in the district. And what else do I want to say? Oh, as far as the health costs, 42% of those deaths listed were from cancer, 33% from injuries, and the rest stemming from conditions, liver cirrhosis, pancreatitis, epilepsy. So they're not insignificant conditions nor costs on the health system. Men accounted for the vast bulk of harm in these health statistics, and the rate of alcohol, as I've said, twice as high for Māori. Now, alcohol is excluded from the Misuse of Drugs Act. Were it to be included, It would be classified as a Class B drug. So you're talking methamphetamine, ecstasy, cannabis oil. It's in the same camp. And people drink alcohol for the same reason they take all those other drugs. It is the degree with which they're consumed that is the issue here, not whether, in alcohol's case, it is consumed or not. It's a legal substance. It is the misuse and inappropriate consumption that we're most concerned about. So the other thing it's important to recognise is and acknowledge the lifelong and next generation impacts of underdiagnosis and diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome. That is a really huge problem in our community, and one we probably don't talk enough about. The neurodevelopmental delays, the behavioural disorders, the inability to parent well, which is a flow-on of that, early childhood deaths, and at the end of it, prison costs. So I guess the question I have for you in our community regarding alcohol, what are you most concerned about? Now, don't have to answer that necessarily now, but I would like you to consider that and think about what it is you're most concerned about. Doesn't anyone have any questions I'd like? Yes, Greg.
Thank you, Karen. Have we got statistics on how many people turn up at the hospital for the emergency department after hours, or
not
how much alcohol contributes to the demand at the hospital?
There are those stats. We don't have them with us today. One of the challenges because that's often asked during a hearing, well, show me the ED stats. Not all EDs collect the data, and because the Medical Health her rohi is wider than the council boundaries, it becomes quite a difficult number crunching. But there are stats available from some hospitals. I don't know if JP has the local ones. So again, it's a resourcing to collate that data and to have it accurate. So this study is really important because it's current. It's current. Okay.
Councillor Patterson, you have a question?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Karen. Has there been any statistics or any information or any research done on the ratio of harm caused by hard liquor versus wine, beer, etc.?
I don't think from a consumption point of view the difference. If your body, from a health point of view, alcohol is alcohol. So they can do statistics on what's being sold, but I don't believe, unless someone's done a meta-analysis on it, that you could pinpoint and say, well, it's just hard liquor and beer's okay. Beer's not the problem. It is volume of alcohol and units consumed.
Well, I guess one of the things that you've raised there is what are you most concerned about is the proliferation of places and the availability of hard liquor in particular is the one that bothers me the most personally. It just concerns me that they seem to be popping up here, there and everywhere. Even one on the corner of Kawaha Point Road and Ferry Springs Road within a block of a new Kāinga Ora development.
Good.
That is a concern to me.
I'm pleased that is a concern for you because it's certainly a concern for me. And if you, when you're reviewing the LAP, decide that certain areas, and we'll get to that, have a saturation, you have the ability to put that in the local alcohol policy. Then the DLC can give effect to that. It is very hard, one by one, premise by premise, for the DLC to make a change without everything being appealed. And it's the slowest way. So the fastest way to make a difference is the LAP. So I'm really pleased to hear that. John, thank you for that.
Got another question from Councillor O'Brien.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair. Thank you, Karen. Could I just ask the previous slide, could I just ask Karen, where it says there, if any objections or opposition is received, is there not a threshold, or could you talk to councillors about how an objection, or unless you're addressing this later on, I'll be more than happy to defer.
Kurt will actually address that's one of the new significant changes to the Act under Section 203A, and exactly, it used to be that just if you lived in the neighbourhood, now it is everybody, and I will cover that in more detail.
Thank you, happy to defer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, Your Worship, the Mayor.
Great to have you back in the chamber, actually. Welcome back.
Thank you.
One of my main concerns is around the domestic violence that occurs in our community. So is that also one of the concerns that you take on board? Like, I know certainly when Fenton Street was at its worst, it was a great surprise that 1/3 of all police call-outs were down Fenton Street for domestic violence. So I just wonder if there's any connection to the statistics that we might get from domestic violence to locations of where alcohols are being sold, and that might be a police question. They might know, because they're certainly the ones that are turning up dealing with these issues. But I know certainly the hospital at some time has also, through the emergency department, seen the increase of quite significant levels of domestic violence, stabbings, etc., people almost dying, and that has been connected to alcohol or drug use, but alcohol as well.
Now, you're correct, the police do collect that data, and in fact, in a hearing, we have been, on a number of occasions, given what they call the card. There's two data sets the police use, NIA, National Information Archive, and then card. So one is when they get called out, but then nothing else, there's nothing further, and then another is when they get attend. And so they have presented to us exactly that. Domestic violence, alcohol-related harm, where they are, where the pockets, where the trending is going, what incidents. So while council doesn't hold that data set, it is available through the police, and obviously they're one of the tri-agencies that we work with. So I believe that will be forthcoming, particularly when you look in your LA, when you get right into the middle of your review of your LAP, because that's hugely important. Where are those pockets? And they will have shifted from our major areas, depending on, well, suburbs change. And we obviously, post-COVID, pretty much everything changed, yes, and with social housing. So yes, that information is available, but not at council's fingertips. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes, sorry, Robert.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Karen. Nice to meet you at last, having heard the name. Just talking about the health benefits, I was of the understanding that the Mediterranean diet encourages low to moderate use of red wine in particular, which has all sorts of antioxidants and other health-giving properties, which are helpful for
Councillor Lee, I think we're just getting a little bit off topic here, so maybe we could just...
That's a little... the only thing I will say about that is that study was funded by an alcohol industry body, so you can take that with a grain of salt, and certainly this is not about moderate consumption. This is about the inappropriate, and we've got a slide on exactly, in fact, the very next slide. Kurt will talk, or the one further, exactly on, it's about excessive or inappropriate consumption. So by all means, if you agree with that, that data, moderation is not the problem here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can carry on with the presentation.
I think you next, Kurt. It's all right, page 9.
Okay, apologies. So alcohol-related harm and what's changed. So this is a really important slide. We have... Apologies, we've actually missed one in our paper here.
I'll talk to this one, I think. That one's... Well, it's slightly out of order.
I think it's the next slide, is it? Are you looking for the alcohol-related harm and what's changed?
Oh, no, there we go. Alcohol-related harm, that is me. Okay, so here's exactly what the Act says. Primarily, under Section 3, it's about the community as a whole. And it's really easy to just, for people to narrow the focus and think, well, I don't have a problem, so why shouldn't I be able to buy a bottle of wine at 10 or 11 o'clock at night whenever I want to? Or... my friends are the same, and people tend to have a view of their own social cohort. But actually, the Act is for the community as a whole. That is everybody, all of the time, everywhere. So that's the prime one in Section 3. Section 4 refers to the harm caused by the excessive or inappropriate consumption of alcohol. Not any harm resulting from the responsible consumption of alcohol, which is really where it goes to your question there, Councillor Lee. And further, it's about minimising rather than the higher threshold of elimination. It's a legal substance, so it's not under the Class B Drugs Act. We're legally allowed to consume it, people are legally allowed to sell it and to supply it. But what this is, the aim of the whole looking at the Act and what it aims to do is to eliminate the excessive or inappropriate consumption. And there are a couple of levers we can do to use that. One is reducing availability, and that can be with hours and locations and premises, and the other is not in our control, is increasing the price, and that's the unit of alcohol, which is a central government issue. So, and the countries that have used those two levers, places like Scotland, known for its consumption of alcohol, it's made a difference, a significant difference to alcohol-related harm. Hasn't stopped anybody from moderately consuming it as they have always done, but it has improved their and reduced their harm and improved their health stats. So that's something you can think about with central government.
Councillor Patterson, you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just with regards to Scotland, if I recall, that was a sugar tax on the alcohol. Is that right?
Not sure that it's actually a sugar tax, although alcohol is a carbohydrate. So if you take the carbohydrate being a sugar, then technically that's one way to view it. But it was on the unit price of alcohol, because not all beers, and I'll use those as an example, are equal. They can be a similar price, but their alcoholic content, alcohol by volume, can be significantly higher than one for a similar price.
Thank you.
And the whole point is that the more alcohol, you should be paying the more money. Okay. Let me see, that's right. And it's not just focused on businesses. So the community as a whole, and it's not only focused, here's to Councillor O'Brien's comment, on the nearest neighbours. In the past, it was 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres. If you live further away than that, well, actually, your opinion didn't really count. Now everybody's opinion counts, because many of us work somewhere, live somewhere else, our children go to school somewhere. So if there's an issue with alcohol-related harm in the community, anyone in the community, not vexatious or nonsense questions, as long as it fits under the criteria in the Act, can object. So, and ultimately, it's about finding the right balance between the use and enjoyment of a legal substance, as we've said, and minimising the often unintended consequences that have and continue to have far-reaching consequences and an enormous burden in all aspects of our society. Really, that's what I'm here to talk to you about, is to recognise that it isn't the law-abiding citizens who consume moderately, it's the problems we have, and they're significant and they're hugely costly to all of us. Okay, sorry, now it's your page 9. Jump myself.
Yeah. So further to Councillor O'Brien's question earlier on, just like to speak about the changes to the Act. So the changes are referred to the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Community Participation Amendment Act 2023, so quite a mouthful, more commonly just called the Amendment Act. So that definitely makes it easier for communities to have a say, and if you go back to what we were talking about right at the start, that the original Act in 2012 did not achieve that, certainly a move in the right direction. So there are some key changes in the Act, and they were brought in 2 sections. So the first tranche of changes has been enforced since the 31st of August last year. So the first set of changes removed the ability for people to appeal provisional local alcohol policies to ALA, the authority, and Karen will speak a little about that further on, but that's a key change and essentially stops LAPs or local alcohol policies being watered down. It also enabled the district licensing committees and ALA to decline to renew a licence if the licence would be inconsistent with conditions on location or licence density in the relevant LAP. So again, back to Councillor Patterson's question around density before. It also allowed any person to object to licence applications, whether as an individual or a representative of a group or organisation, with narrow exceptions for trade competitors or their surrogates. Tranche 2 were changes that have been in force since the 30th of May this year. So this second set of changes alters the way that licensing hearings are run. And the changes include requiring that DLCs avoid unnecessary formality and do not allow participants to be cross-examined. So when we were talking before about DLCs having similar authority to a judge, we're looking to deformalise that and make it a bit friendlier for people to become involved in. DLCs in ALA will also be required to consider reasonable requests from parties to attend hearings remotely, so just making that more accessible for people. And also allowing for tikanga to be incorporated into proceedings and allow evidence to be received in te reo Māori. Any questions on those changes to the Act?
Okay, so Auckland's local alcohol policy example, and again, this was some Stuff News, it was reported there. It took them almost 10 years. So the council developed in 2015, Auckland Council, just as we did, a local alcohol policy. That was appealed by the supermarket giants. So it went to ALA. Their decision, they upheld council, that was appealed. So then it went to the High Court, and that was appealed. Then it went to the Court of Appeal. That was appealed, so then it went to the Supreme Court. So I've referred to this as the landmark decision of the Supreme Court. I don't know how much they spent over that 10-year period. I do know Christchurch spent $2 million and ended up with no LAP due to supermarkets appealing what was in it. Now, the key points in the Auckland LAP are are opening hours. So they have set, and it comes in, they're given operators, licensees 3 months to get themselves ready for it. They've set a 9 p.m. closing for all off licences. That includes supermarkets, grocery stores. Any off licence has a 9 p.m. closing. So they've put a restriction on the location of new licences, and they've done it geographically, suburb by suburb, so that they can look at. And also they've added a range of discretionary conditions that can be applied to licences. For everything they have put in their LAP, and they have a number of district licensing committees in Auckland, that makes their job much easier because we're not having individual battles at every hearing. It's in the LAP, we must give effect to it as district licensing committees. We can make more stringent conditions, but we certainly can't go against what's in your LAP. And that's, I'll just let that sink in for a minute, because the tougher you make the LAP, the easier you make our job, and the more opportunity you have to reduce alcohol-related harm in the community. So don't underestimate the power that you have in this review of the policy, particularly since 203 came in. Yes, Greg. Councillor Brown, you have a question?
I do. Do you know whether the decision from the Supreme Court had implications on premises? You said 9 p.m. for off licences.
You'll have to read their LAP. Predominantly the issue that was appealed was the supermarkets closing hours on off licences. That was the point of the appeal. So I believe that I don't believe it affected where they sat with on licences, and they didn't, obviously they haven't had an LAP in process, so they would have been operating under the default national hours, which are 4 a.m. for an on-licence premise, and they would have chosen, and I believe well, I know it is because I've read it, it's 3 a.m. for on-licence premises is their maximum trading in the inner city. Yeah.
Thank you.
If that answers that, yes. Yes, Don.
Thank you. Just recently, I believe Tauranga had a crack at cutting down the hours, or should I say, making the hours later for purchasing alcohol from supermarkets. So instead of 7 o'clock when you open, they were going to make it 11 or 10 o'clock. Do you know if that's come to pass?
I'm not aware of what Tauranga has done. If it's in their LAP, then everybody has to abide by it. If that came through a decision of the DLC, then essentially if that was your premise and you didn't agree with the 11 a.m, if that was the case, opening hours, then that could be appealed. And therein lies the rub, that you put it in the LAP, no, it can't be appealed. Your LAP can't be appealed, but our decisions can't be appealed either because they're in line with your LAP. So I can't speak to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Lee's got a question.
Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I seem to recall going to West Auckland about a decade ago, and they weren't selling alcohol, even wine, in any of the supermarkets. Is that part of the same legal case?
They operate under licensing trusts, and they have always operated under licensing trusts. So there are a few places in the country where supermarkets do not sell alcohol, and West Auckland is one of them. And I am not aware that that's likely to change. So essentially, the licensing trusts get all of the money from, so they're the they make the profit, but they use that to for the benefit of the community. So one year they gave out smoke alarms, another year they gave out safety whistles, or those sorts of things to the community. So they're using that money, but there is no alcohol sold in supermarkets in the areas that have a licensing trust.
What's the legal framework behind that?
I'm not able to answer that question. There's probably a bit of research you could do behind that, but there aren't many of them around the country, but certainly West Auckland is one area. Invercargill, another one. Okay, so...
All right, well, I think we'll carry on with the
Okay. So, Rotorua Local, your alcohol policy. Now, you have the opportunity, as I've said, to change things. And what can you do? Well, when you consult with the community and hear what they have to say, which we did last time in 2015. So in 2015, when the first consultation went out for the local alcohol policy, we had a really robust policy. It was about, if memory serves me, about 26 pages long. What we ended up with was a leaflet of about 6 pages. Because of the appeals going on around the country, we either stuck to our guns and ended up with no LAP, or we compromised and removed this bit and removed this bit, took all the teeth out of it, took out anything really important, anything controversial, not willingly I can say, because I led that, but we ended up with an LAP because we did not want to be left with the default national trading hours. So that's, and the things that we capitulated on are the things that you can make a difference with this time around. So there are things, pricing through conditions, amenity and good order, and I'll cover these in a little bit more detail, noise, nuisance and vandalism, and how that can be addressed, and alcohol advertising at street level. So Auckland, again, has a policy for, in their, well, it's a policy by the DLC, but essentially could go in the LAP for reducing alcohol advertising at street level. So it's not in your face, you're not seeing it, it's a very small portion. Now, Council's bylaw, signs bylaw, has the same effect, except that without the enforcement and without the follow-up individually, then pretty much people push the envelope and they get away with as much as they can until someone tells them, actually, you've gone too far. And that usually happens if we have a hearing. If you put a reduction in signage in the LAP, as I've said, it makes the job of the DLC a lot easier, and you will get consistency. So if you can go to some communities, and Queenstown's one, okay, there's a lot of new building down there, but you do not see the signage that you'd see anywhere else in the country. They have very strict, and it's about aesthetics, about beautification, it's about making a community and a city that people feel proud of, and a lot of the advertising could be seen as too much. So yes, visual pollution. The other things, and we'll look at that, are what hours suit our community. Should off licences open after school starts? And should they close at 9 o'clock, like our major city in Auckland has said? That's a question for you to ask and to ask the community, and to see what their feedback is on what hours they think are appropriate for us here. And that's really why it's so important that you kind of understand the potential that you have to make a real difference, and having an LAP that aligns itself with the key objects of the Act for the community as a whole and to minimise harm. Okay, so recent case law. Now, there's a couple of examples I'll touch on. The first is the Two Brothers decision. That happened over in Rotorua, and it was only a couple of years ago, I think 2022 maybe, memory. And this is used, these quotes are used in many decisions, and it's become a significant piece of case law. And it hones on the fact there's no consecutive licence renewals. So there's as it says, there's nothing punitive about a decision not to renew a licence, although the applicants certainly feel that at the time. And under section 133, if granting a renewal is inconsistent with the LAP, DLCs can refuse it, or we can alter the conditions, amend the conditions in there so that they will fit with the LAP. But once the LAP comes in, you can do what Auckland's done and said, right, everyone's got 3 months to comply. Those are the rules, and everyone's going to comply with them. There are no existing use rights. Now, existing use rights is often a RMA, resource management, well, the business has been here for... That doesn't apply. The building can stay, but the licence, there is no existing use rights to that. And that's something that people haven't really considered in the past. So I'll just go through a few of those points. Okay. Next one is, okay, and just a little bit more case law. Now, this was nearly 20 years ago. This is used again. DLCs quote case law in their decision-making when we write them up, and we get the case law from the High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, ALA. Mostly it's from ALA. Things don't usually travel further up. But essentially, times change, and communities' environments change. Social habits, levels of tolerance change, and obviously it would have seemed by the legislature to be wise to keep conditions imposed under review in light of potential social change. Licensee submission would have licence condition frozen in some time warp while the world marches on, and not even in the arcane world of liquor licensing, a likely legislative intention. So Section 4 interpretation directives align with common sense to point towards allowing the authority to engage in the wider perspective. It can keep its eye on wider trends and needs in a specialist area where it has unique and uniquely current expertise. So any licensee takes a risk under licence that conditions may change and a report may recommend adjustment. There's no asset protected for all time, whatever may happen. So what's really important about this is consider yourselves 10 to 15 years ago, and I can tell you on my time in council, the non-alcoholic beverages on offer were orange juice, and if you were lucky, 11 lime and bitters. There were no zero alcohol beers, there were no zero wines, there was no zero AF spirits. There was the proliferation of alcohol, either low alcohol or no alcohol products, is enormous. And that reflects the conversation that people are having, and it reflects the behaviour people are exhibiting when they go out. Very different from what it was when this was written, although this applies now. This is still current. This could have been written today. Times do change. And again, it's really opportune that the LAP is due for review. It couldn't be at a better time. Timing is everything. And I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to speak to you about the important work that you can do. So let's get on to the next one, which is amenity and good order. So it's a frequent point of consideration for DLCs, the agencies and the community. It boils down to whether you as a business is being or is likely to be a good neighbour. And often people say, well, how do you know? I mean, what does it mean? The term usually is pleasant. Is it pleasant and agreeable? Most of us will know when we feel safe walking somewhere. While we may not know the words to describe it. It's all about the amenity and good order of a place. That is what it means. Is there a lot of noise, and what sort of noise, and when is it noisy? The nuisance and vandalism. What are other licensed premises nearby? Are they contributing to the problem? Who are the neighbours, and how are their properties being used? So, and does the area have enough licences already? Saturation, again, those points. How many's too many for a neighbourhood? And it will be really interesting to do the overlay on where they all sit, because I can tell you they do not sit in the high socio-economic, low deprivation areas. They sit very squarely in the low socio-economic areas with high deprivation. That's around the country. In fact, I think one of the quotes from an Auckland councillor was that children in Otara walked past 14 licensed premises on their way to school. Okay, so noise, nuisance and vandalism. So again, a bit of case law here, and I'm putting the case law in because it's not just something that we're plucking out of the air because it sounds nice or we think it's good, or this is actually based on sound legal principle. And the big thing here, it's not enough for the licensee just to say, oh, I'm doing my best, we're doing our best. Actually, that doesn't wash any longer. Where noise, nuisance and vandalism can be linked to a licensed premises, despite the best endeavours, the DLC must act to minimise that. So if they don't do their own work, we will reduce their hours and or refuse to renew their licence. So it's, and Paihia saltwater is another one, that noise is not just an RMA issue, a resource management issue. The escape of noise, particularly music, is an example of bad management. And you all know places where it's way too noisy outside. In fact, sometimes it's noisier outside than it is when you're inside. And the authority takes the view that if no attempt is made to prevent the escape of noise or reduce it, then it's the authority's duty to monitor the hours of opening. So if you can't be quiet after midnight, then maybe you shouldn't be open after midnight. And if not, the existence. And the authority will always give full credit to those holders who acknowledge any existing noise problems and try to do something about it. And in our view, host responsibility does not exclude the people who live nearby. There are many licensed premises, and they've shown that they can operate in harmony with residential neighbours. And it's no coincidence that managers and owners of such premises also show a commitment to the reduction of liquor. Now, I can give you an example here locally. We had a licensed premise, had noise issues. There was opposition to the renewal of that licence, so they got a sound engineer in, they put baffles, they turned the speakers inward facing instead of external facing. That made a huge difference to the escape of noise. So because they had gone mitigated, and obviously you're not going to remove the noise completely, it's an evening licensed premise, but they had done everything they could to manage responsibly the noise, then the opposition was withdrawn. And that's a good outcome. That's a good outcome. Okay, so what have we got then? Sensitive sites. Okay. Who are the neighbours? Now, in the current LAP, of which we have a couple of copies here, the sensitive sites means education facilities and marae. Now, I would like to ask you to broaden your concept of sensitive sites to drug and alcohol rehab areas, health providers, because there are many communities where there's case law from Cannons Creek and Rotorua, where there was exactly that, a drug and alcohol rehab, and someone were literally setting up a bottle store 2 doors away. How appropriate is that? Not very. Needless to say, it didn't get granted. But that's the consideration of, and again, broadening that scope of sensitive sites. And again, no new off licence. So currently, we have a policy in the LAP about no new off licence applications being granted if the premises are to be located outside the inner city and within a 200-metre radius of a sensitive site. There are, unless council or ALA or DLC, then ALA is satisfied it's appropriate to do so. So that excludes a business that sells. So if you sell a business and you are granted, the new owner is granted a temporary authority, then that policy doesn't apply there. It applies to a brand new greenfield development somewhere. Okay, so Are there any questions on this aspect or anything else we've covered so far?
Okay, there's quite a lot of information there, councillors, so
It is a
things
lot
to think about.
It is a lot to think about, and certainly I have no problem with the copy of the slides for people to refer to later.
I think they've already been dropped into Stella,
okay,
councillors,
okay,
so they are in Stella under the policy folder.
Okay, well, I'm on my second to last page, so we're nearly there. Okay, days and hours. So, high deprivation, high harm areas. Now, I can tell you what they were when I was a councillor. They will have changed, but off the top of my head, I know they were Orfota, they were Fenton Park, Western Heights, Fordlands, Ngāpuna. Now, due to changes, certainly in the last 5 years, they will have shifted. So demographics change, and I know that is a piece of work that council will be working on to get those overlays and to look at where are your high deprivation, and how many licensed premises are there, and how many police call-outs do we have for domestic violence and harm. What are our problem areas? So let's target those areas specifically, with looking at whether they've got also, how close are they to sensitive sites? Now, we have a 100-plus-year-old primary school in town, which is 30 or 40 metres away from some licensed premises. Now, they are existing. However, there are things that can be managed, and particularly those that have gaming machines, and aligning the gambling policy, looking at making sure those other policies that set to manage that kind of behaviour are aligned in council. And I appreciate you've got a workshop on gambling tomorrow. So questions to ask. Bottle stores near nightlife. Now, this isn't a current problem for us here, but it has been in other regions. And if we have an application that seeks to have a bottle store between entertainment venues, what happens in some communities is they'll be going from a concert here, they'll pick up at the off licence and preload all their way to the next place they're going. And of course you can imagine the rubbish, the problems, the fighting. Is that a good idea to have a bottle store between? Not necessarily. So, and again, that can be part of where is the best site, and which sites simply off-licensed premises do not belong. And again, back to hours again, Councillor Patterson, how early is too early, and who are they selling to at that time of the morning? Who are their customers? And what percentage of their business trading goes on before lunchtime? Who are they selling to late at night? And what products are they selling? And what percentage of their turnover comes from trading? The one in Auckland that I spoke about briefly, the bottle store between 2 night time, that 29% of their trading happened between 10 and 11 p.m. Yeah. And you can times that as probably 30% of the problems in the community later that night. That's a significant, and reducing that, so with the 9 p.m. close in Auckland, that simply won't be able to happen. Okay, and there's just a question, just something else I want to mention on days and hours, just before I wrap up. The main argument for lots of people is, well, it's got to be a level playing field, and there's case law, Sahota versus Williams in June, and this is 2023 case law. It seems that proposes the same treatment for all licensed premises. Now, that's fine if the uniform hours are in the LAP, but applicants often say, well, they're open till 3, I should be allowed to open till 3. But without the guideline or the set rules in the LAP, decision-making bodies, either the authority or DLCs, we have to regard everything specific about that. And while we may reduce the hours and make them have a one-way door and do all of the things we can, and look at the residential areas, predominantly commercial, what is it? Those can all be appealed. So again, and I know I've re-emphasised it, the stronger you make the LAP, the easier you make it for the DLC and certainly for everyone to do their job. Okay, and I think I think I've got one. Oh yeah, and lastly, okay. So the big changes, as Kurt has spoken about, Section 203A, which came in last August, your LAP cannot be appealed. Your dog policy can't be appealed. Your gambling policy can't be appealed. Your parking policy can't be appealed, but the LAPs could. That's now been removed. So you listen to our community, and the Rotorua LAP has a chance of actually reflecting, truly reflecting the community, not necessarily what happens down the road, although there are some good examples of it, and certainly not the standard default hours, national default trading hours. So what else have I got there? And you have an opportunity to change the hours of off licence, as we've spoken, to and try and make a difference to the disproportionate effects on Māori. So I hope that this workshop today has given you an opportunity to really consider issues about alcohol that you probably hadn't ever thought of, and to really grasp the bull by the horns when you go out to the community, find out what they want changed, and have the courage to do it. So thank you. And questions, please. I think that's the last. And thank you. Yes. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Karen, once again. Do I understand rightly that if someone wanted to make an application for a liquor licence, they can do it online through the One Council system now?
Yes.
Okay, so how's that system going? I noticed we had a little issue that was in the media in the last month about a ghost dog that was charged.
Sorry,
Are there any issues in that sort of area?
I'll have to feed back to you separately, Councillor. As I say, it's a new system, so I'll just check with the team and we can feed back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for you. Thank you very much. Could I ask the three of you, or if anyone's able to help, could you confirm for me, did the Whakatane, Apoutiki and Kawerau councils combine their LAPs or similar hours, etc.? Could anyone advise?
I'm not aware, actually, Conan, of that, but they may well have. Sometimes regions do decide, particularly the smaller areas, to band together, because it does make sense if you have immediate neighbours to have consistency. And okay. I'm hoping that the Auckland example is followed nationally, okay. Since it's now case law.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Brown.
Two questions, if I may, Madam Chair. Do you have a view on, you talk a lot about off licence, 9 PM up here, do you have a view of on premise, on licence? That you would like to share in terms of hours, or?
In terms of hours, I can tell you from my experience that anything, and I think this is something you are aware of yourself, Greg, that anything open after 1:30 is a magnet for trouble. So the premises that we have closed have either been mismanaged, in one case repeatedly, so it was more a case of mismanagement than serious problems. The other premises that we have closed that have been open till 3 AM have resulted in 200-person brawls, people going to hospital, being knocked unconscious, coward punches, gangs, and essentially and migration from one to another. And so generally, even those premises that have 3 AM licences, and there are a number around, most of them do not choose to stay open and the police will tell you, after 1 o'clock, and all of their call-outs and all of the stats. So we had a significant, you may or may not be aware, a premise closed in Ottawa Street, end of July last year, actually. We had the hearing the December before, but they got a stay over Christmas, and by the time it came to Arla, it was another 7 months, and that caused significant. That was since the opening, and that had only been operating a year. The police were there every single Friday and Saturday night, and within 2 weeks of getting their licence, they had their first call out. So my own opinion on hours are a well-managed premise is not a problem and doesn't come to the attention of the agencies. I don't agree with the 4 a.m. Default hours. I think particularly that's a big city thing. Certainly there are some in Queenstown and certainly some in Wellington. And I'm guessing, in Auckland there'll only be 3 a.m. But my own opinion is a well-run premise, and that includes security, CCTV. So there's a bunch of, just to enlarge on that, a bunch of principles called CPTED, which is the crime prevention through environmental design, and that is something we look at, and that is also part of the LAP, and that can be strengthened as well. Are there view shafts? Do they have security? What clientele are they attracting? How are they managing it? All of those sorts of things. So that's a long response to your short question.
Well, thank you for sharing. The other question I had was perhaps JP's, can we get FPOS data specifically for licence, on licence, off licence, I think, around how much is sold after 9? Can we just narrow down what's happening in Rotorua?
I'll try and find some information. I don't know, Councillor, but I will check into that, and I certainly could probably give you. I understand that we can get it hourly, so we can get data across the city hourly, which I think by default might give us at least some steer as to the spending behaviours and location. So we might be able to get it into suburban areas, which might highlight there is only certain things happening in certain suburbs at certain times, which might be able to triangulate some of the question you're asking.
Thank you.
If I could just add a little bit to that, certainly we, the DLC, have the power to, for an order for the production of documents, and as well as summon witnesses, and we have done that. And there's 2 sorts of documents we'll often order for the production, and one will be the financial details of who sold it, who's funding it, getting behind that veil of secrecy, whether it's just a whole bunch of companies in the same, and finding out whether there's vendor finance and is it just a sham sale or an actual sale. The other is for the production of documents for point of sale data. So hour by hour, unit by unit, product by product. So within a hearing, and certainly in the DLC training that has gone on by King's Counsel Karen South, then that data, the DLC can require that in a hearing. Obviously, it would be redacted, so not open for public, because there is specific data per premise is financially, it's important that that's kept confidential. But that is, the DLC has the ability to request that. And we have started doing that. And in fact, on one occasion, when we asked for both all of the financial detail, the application was suddenly withdrawn.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, you had another question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your leniency. Sorry, Karen, this question may be more for JP and Kurt. Could I ask, in the fees set by Council for applications, particularly for on and off licences, is there any capacity in the legislation or the amendments for any financing to go towards CPTED, or must it only be financing our liquor operations? Sorry, alcohol and licensing operations.
Thanks, Councillor. So it does all come back to our alcohol licensing operations. I would just say on the back of that, though, is that as a result of the changes to the Amendment Act, the fees, and just while we're talking about fees, is also something that will come up as a separate subject later on. We are certainly seeing an increase in objections from the public, etc., as anticipated under the Act. But yes, all of that money must come back to the alcohol licensing operations.
Just expand on what Kurt had said there, with the new legislation coming in and the likelihood that almost all applications will go to hearing because of that open nature of that process. We're doing some evaluation, bit of time and motion studies of our current team and how long it's taking them for applications and to proceed through the hearing process. My expectations is I will need to come back to you probably in line for the annual plan to ask for a reconsideration of some of our fees because of the time involved with the new legislation.
Sorry, could I just clarify? So is there an opportunity for Council to direct an increase in fees to be towards, say, other areas, say, like security cameras? Or, sorry, it must only be for our liquor operations or licensing operations?
No, so that would be just for the alcohol operations.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I just had one question just going forward, because we've had a lot of things that we need to think about, a lot of questions that we need to ask, is that how do we then refine this down to actually get a policy that actually can go out for consultation? And I suppose it comes back to something that you often say, JP, that turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So are we just going to get submissions from, bottle store owners and dairies and things like that sell alcohol that don't want any of this to come in, and we won't get good submissions from the general public around the wider community good, which is what the legislation now refers to?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I think there's another slide just on the back of the presentation. I'm hoping there is, sorry, in microscopic font. Councillor, what you're highlighting is from today's session, we need to come back to you with probably another workshop to hone in on what kind of options do you want to see in your special consultative procedure or through a draft LAP, so that you can actually go out and have that consultation with the community. Highlighting again, the purpose here is to remove the harm of excessive and inappropriate consumption and minimise those kind of impacts. We're a community with high deprivation, and unfortunately, as so many of you have pointed out at different discussions and debates around this room, we have extremely high levels of crime victimisation compared with other territorial local authorities across the country. You've heard today, and it's a fact, alcohol contributes to that, and those hours of operation significantly contribute to that outcome as well. So this is an important policy discussion for the council, but equally for the community to have their say. So we would expect Toi Te Ora, Public Health New Zealand to be contributing. We would expect to see the New Zealand Police provide their perspective and some detail on that. We would expect the supermarkets to be feeding into any discussion we have about off licences, and we certainly expect the bars and those operating in that space to be contributing as well. But I would hope that if we do this successfully and make sure we operate an appropriate promotion of the LAP going out for consultation, we will see a lot of community groups or nationally linked community groups provide their perspective on the issues as well. So this is a pretty significant set of policies, combined with a few other significant policies we've talked about, which really go to the heart of a focus on reducing harm and improving safety in our community. So we certainly will be promoting this heavily. This is a really important issue as a community to talk about.
Okay. Thank you, JP. So is there one more workshop that we will do before you go out mid-October for councillors to just kind of refine? So you'll be currently gathering all the information to answer a lot of the questions that have been asked here and bringing back some recommendations based on best practice and recent legislation and decisions to give us the kind of steer in terms of the parameters in which the policy should go out for consultation?
I believe that would be what you would like. This is a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of evidence that sits behind some of the decisions you need to make. So I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that if we can fit in a workshop, rather than just presenting to you some of the good practice we've started to see around the country, it would be better for you to have that ability to really review that and make your own specific decisions on how you want the LAP to be shaped up.
Okay, thank you, JP. Your Worship.
Thank you. Just had a question regarding what sort of decision we're making, because I recall one of the big groups who was coming in and lobbying very strongly at one stage with the supermarkets around what they can sell. So that was, in the past, they could only sell wine and beer, and with the introduction of ciders that were more like RTDs, it became this complex issue of, well, should they be able to sell those as well? And they, of course, wanted to say yes because it was more profit for them, but there was some in the community saying no because it's just, those sorts of drinks were targeted at the younger or more vulnerable age group of harm. So is that a decision, who makes that decision of who can sell what? Because it sort of connects to Councillor Don Patterson's question earlier as well, around what is actually causing harm. So, yeah.
It's pretty much legislated in the Act of what venue can sell what product. So they list, I think, for supermarkets, they'll include mead, so honey-based. things like that. They can't sell green ginger wine, so you can argue which side of the fence that might sit on. So, but there is essentially a list in the Act. So it's not something you need to council needs to concern themselves about product.
Councillor Patterson?
Thank you for your indulgence. Just one more question. This has been formulating in my mind from back in the days when I was in the industry, when the big booze barns existed, where you'd have 300, 400 people at a pub listening to a live band, and then at 10 o'clock they'd all go home. Alcohol was cheap. Now we have small bars where alcohol is very expensive, like $11, $12 for a beer. And the anecdotal evidence, I guess you could say, is that that's driven people to drink at home, and having backyard bars and things in garages which are uncontrolled, unmonitored, and don't have a licence. And this is where the large troubles can spring from. As we saw on the news the other night, that terrible conflict going on in somewhere in South Auckland, just people out of hand drunk causing trouble. Has there been any research done on the price of alcohol in bars versus what's going on in the community? Do we know if that's got any direct correlation?
I think there is a direct correlation, and back in the day, as you refer to, it was expensive to buy alcohol anywhere, and if it was as expensive to buy it at an off-licence premise as it was in a bar, more people would go to the bar because it's more fun, simply because it's a more social environment. So again, that's central government policy on unit price of alcohol, and they know this. The data is 20 years of it. It's whether there's a willingness and whether the alcohol lobby is louder than the community, and thus far they have been. So that's a significant change. I mean, the money someone spends in an on-licence premise more truly reflects the cost of alcohol, not the cheap booze barn. There is just on premises like that. There's case law about a nightclub in Auckland, which was the largest, 500 people, Sogi. And it was needless to say opposed when it applied. It ended up being refused to renew. They had enormous issues, and we've had the same here with urination, vomiting, detritus, outside people's homes, outside people's businesses. And I guess the question, and we've had someone in our community that every Sunday night he would go in and check and bring his water blaster before he opened on a Monday morning, because he could not open his business premise without cleaning up the weekend's mess. And primary schools that have broken glass and needles and, again, vomit and urination in those areas. So, I mean, abuse of alcohol is a huge problem, whether people are preloading, side-loading, buying it, and reduction in hours for off-licences is significant, as is not allowing them to have takeout, like you can order a pizza. So that became, during COVID, quite a big issue. Someone applied to run something here so that you could literally get another crate sent to your house in 15 minutes. And how does that, now who's going to turn up to some premises and ask for ID? Who's responsible? So that didn't take hold here. And advertising on Facebook for those sorts of things. So I can tell you, when I have a hearing, I Google their Facebook, I look at all their social media, I see what kind of things they're posting, what kind of venue are they, what kind of person are they. Obviously not so much for an off-licence premise, but for others, it creates a really good picture. So haven't really answered your, other than the fact that government need to move on this. But you can do, if you change the hours, reduce the availability, then people can't get in their car or can't walk down the street at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night and buy more.
When they've already had a skinful, yeah.
Precisely. Now, Fisher, I think you had a...
Councillor Wang had a question, I think.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen, and I share the sentiments from others. Great to see you back in here again. The first question is probably more of a curt, but actually overlays both. So It's been said in the presentation and asked a couple of times as well, I guess the relationship between the council noise control officers and let's just say the DLC. Are you able to speak a little bit more about that and I guess the correlation of it?
Absolutely. So noise is a very important part of the good amenity and good order side of things. So generally that will be picked up when the council's own inspectorate are doing their reports, and they will look at that side of things. They will look at, have there been, how many valid noise complaints have they had since the last renewal, and basically make a decision on whether they are doing all they can to control that. They will not go out and do any monitoring on behalf of the applicant. That will all fall back to the applicants, their application. And depending on where they get to, they will then round that up in their summary report through to the DLC to make a decision on noise amongst a myriad of other factors in relation to whether that licence should be granted or renewed.
Thank you. And just the second question was just around the sensitive sites. So as it was made clear in the presentation, so that means the education facilities and marae. Is there I guess a specific criteria that the sensitive sites have to meet, or can we, through this process, set, I guess, new sensitive sites, such as areas of, let's say, emergency housing, social housing, places of worship, etc.?
Absolutely. Absolutely you can. So I don't remember, because it was too long ago, whether we reduced the list of sensitive sites in the original LAP, but I think what I can tell you is that conversations have changed. Society's expectations have shifted a lot in the last 10 years. And what we used to regard as, okay, well, really, what's the problem? Actually, we're not nearly as blasé about it. We recognise that there are a lot more places that we would regard as sensitive sites. And that's a really good thing to ask the community, because they'll all have a slightly different view on what's sensitive or not. But I think the parameters of whether it's, again, young people, whether it's, again, related to health and rehab, those sorts of things, whether it's sacred spaces, those are generic terms that, again, the community can drill down on. And we already have liquor bans. Council has liquor bans in certain areas, but that only is really about the consumption of drinking in the public places there. What this can do is reduce, and possibly even with a sinking lid, that if businesses sell and aren't bought, then, the quickest way really to get rid of off licences you don't want, and don't quote me on it, is to buy them and then shut them down. Because when they change hands, they just keep in those places, and they just keep changing hands. So short of them coming to the attention and mismanaging and basically either selling to underage people or having serious, and we don't close premises down lightly. We have to have extremely good grounds and legal grounds to do so. So we form an opinion, we're a commission of inquiry on whether we can do that, but it's not taken lightly, otherwise the decisions would be overturned.
Thank you, and you've answered my third question perfectly, so appreciate that.
Thank you, Karen. Just on that point then, so this whole purpose of this policy is part of our keeping the community safe. So if we bring in a new, let's call it more restrictive LAP, then how quickly would we see a reduction? So would we have to wait for the current licences to be renewed and then they would drop off? Or would it immediately, let's say it was next to a sensitive site, would it immediately come into effect and then they'd have a certain period of time to close down? Or what's the...
Tricky one on that one. I'm not sure. Yeah, the only thing at that state on an existing site that pretty much is behaving the rules is reducing their hours and putting conditions around it. You may remember Sunset Road, I'll use that as an example. Now the community, this was in 2010, so prior to this new act, it was under the old legislation, they had a march. The community had a march down Sunset Road because they did not want that off licence that's just off Old Taupo Road down Sunset Road, because of the kids walking to school past there. So their hours, they're closed between a certain period when children walk past. Now, you could decide to put that in for everybody, or you could just decide to truncate their hours, or actually closing. The sinking lid can only happen if a premise either is shut and then isn't able to be resold. So generally what happens, if you've got a licensed premise, you just decide that you want to retire or you move somewhere else, you will sell it and it will have an existing licence. So, and the person will come in, they will get a temporary authority for 3 months to operate under the existing conditions of the licence they've just bought until they apply for their own licence. So the difficulty in closing premises is if they haven't come to the attention of the agencies, and I don't know that you could do that with just putting in a sensitive site. You can recognise it any more than the businesses near Rotorua Primary School, and there are a number across the road. If they're a problem, one of them is closed now, and there's a police sale sign there, and that also had its gambling machines removed. So that was a win on that count on a number of fronts.
Thank you. I was just wondering just how easy it would have been to kind of get some outcomes a lot quicker, given that this is partly what we're trying to drive with looking at this policy as well as the alcohol harm.
I'd still come back to the hours of operation would probably be the strongest and I'll use the word easiest because it's been all the way to the highest court, which would have confirmed the evidential effect of those operating hours on reducing harm. So there is a case law that gives operating hours the power and obviously the impact that it would have. Now, even though I'd love to be vastly different from another part of the country, I think as New Zealanders, our drinking behaviours and our behaviours are pretty similar. So I would have thought what's been tested in Auckland is more than likely to be true here.
Okay, thanks for that, JP. Are there any final questions, councillors? Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your presentation today, the three of you. Just very quickly, could I ask, happy hours, what, in your opinion, what's the contribution to alcohol harm caused by happy hours? Do you have a concern of them, or by and large is it a pretty...
I do, and I have a...
I'm not surprised, but that's okay.
No, the misnomer, if it's a happy hour, it should be a happy hour, not a happy afternoon, is in my own personal opinion. I don't know whether that can go in the LAP. It would be worth testing it. They do contribute because they're... And I understand businesses wanting to attract customers. But actually, from a licensing point of view, we cannot take any commercial considerations. We can't consider anything commercial. Whether you go under or whether you do well is neither here nor there from a licensing perspective. I think that happy hours should be restricted. There's nothing in the Act about them that I believe about happy hours. I'm not even sure what their legal basis is. So that would be an interesting thing to explore. But I certainly think if and everyone has them, pretty much most of them do, I would prefer they were an hour, not a happy afternoon, or happy hours starting or going till 9 p.m. That's just a nonsense. And it's just really trying to get more customers to buy cheaper alcohol, which leads to greater intoxication.
Thank you. Just from memory, I think we used to, during my time, under the promotions of the application, we used to ask applicants to put down what they proposed to do. So I presume that's still monitored to some degree, but I'll leave that to Mr. Williams and Mr. Gaston. Could I ask JP, in regards to CBD in particular, I used to notice particularly on where popular nightclubs are, not that I'd go in them obviously, but I'd go past, waiting lines outside. Quite often I used to, it's not beyond the realms of possibility to see trouble from the waiting lines waiting to get in. That's not really something we can put on the owner if it's not on their property, is it? Or if so, if not, is that something the RMA can help with as we look at our CBD planning?
That's a very good question, and I would probably put that more in the realm of the host responsibility side of things in terms of how, as a venue, and I guess the suitability of the applicant in terms of how they are managing their patrons at any time.
How would I do that on footpath I don't own?
So that comes back to, I guess, in using the example of vomit or litter outside a premise, just because it's outside the premise does not necessarily mean that they're not responsible for it. I know the Sogi case that Karen had mentioned earlier was very much about that in Auckland. It was the effects of people spilling out outside the premise on the surrounds.
So that's a tool we could use to address that.
Yes.
And probably the last one, and it's actually outside of the RMA discussion, is our footpath trading policy. We have an area called Eat Street where they have an extensive extension of their premise onto our footpath under obviously the roof, but equally across the rest of the CBD there is other areas where footpath trading also includes their liquor licensed space. So actually our footpath trading policy is one we will have to look at in light of whatever we choose to do around the LAP, and again just to ensure that we're being consistent in achieving our own outcomes. It's not just the licensed premise, but it's actually equally the conditions we set in our footpath trading policy.
Thank you. And finally, could I just ask, in regards to the difference with RTDs between 5% and 7% ones, is there anything we can do as far as, outlining in our policy the preferment, for better words, of a 5% as opposed to the 7% sales?
There are some conditions that can, selling them individually, we can put a condition to so that you can't break down a pack or sell individual. We have those on our off licences that under a certain volume you can't sell them individually. Craft beer is exempted because they're not at that cheap price, high volume, RTDs or shots or things like that. So those, and certainly conditions like that can be, discretionary conditions can be put in the LAP that automatically will flow through to all licences. So it's an area that you could certainly look at.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any final questions, councillors? I think we've had good opportunity this afternoon to make use of your expertise, Karen and Kurt. If there are no final questions, can I thank you all very much for that presentation. So that's given us a lot to think about and obviously a lot more work to do, and we've got a timeline there of when we need to get things done by. So, and we look forward to working with Anna in due course, so welcome as well again. And we'll continue on tomorrow afternoon with the second iteration of the gambling policy, so just looking at community harm, so what we can do to mitigate that. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Karen, for coming in. And Councillor Wing, closing karakia, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai, haumie, huie, tāekie.
Thank you, Councillor Wing, and thank you very much, everyone.